Good day. It's my honor to present to you this keynote. I will be speaking about the annihilation of difference, trauma, and witnessing. So there are many people have talked about genocide. These are just a few quotes. And when I talk about annihilation, I'm really going to be speaking about genocide. Judith Lewis Herman said, the conflict between the will to deny horrible events and the will to proclaim them aloud is the central dialectic of psychological trauma. Primo Levi, who survived the Holocaust, has written, monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men, the functionaries ready to believe and to act without asking questions. And Elie Wiesel, also from the Holocaust, I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And that's what I will be speaking about today, that when we speak about genocide, how do we witness, why do we witness, and what are our moral and ethical responsibilities as we do this. These are some scenes of genocides. They are all within the 20th and 21st centuries. In recent years, we see in Cambodia, we see Rwanda, we see the Holocaust, and we see the Armenian genocide that left many, many orphans. So how do we define genocide? Genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. It includes killing of the members, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. This could be through starvation. It could be through deprivation of medical care, through chemical warfare, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. We see, and particularly in recent years, the use of rape as a form of genocide, and forcibly transferring children of one group to another. And we see this, for instance, in the forced institutionalization of Native American children, of Native children in Canada, and of the treatment of the Aboriginal populations in Australia. So why, we must ask, does one group of people set out to eradicate another group? What are the consequences? And who is a witness? And how should witnesses respond? So there are a number of premises that underlie the commission of genocide. There's the idea of differences between groups, and that somehow these differences are reified. People are de-identified and they are seen as not being human. A desire for regularity and homogeneity, that an entire population should be the same and share the same values. A desire for what a government may or people may consider progress. And very often what we see is a structuring in the form of what are called meta-narratives. Us versus them, good versus evil, we are good, they are evil, belonging and alien. They don't belong to us, they are different, pure and impure, and then progress and degeneration, that we are making progress and this other population, whoever they may be, are symptomatic of degeneration, and we must halt that in the name of progress. What we do know is that when genocide is committed, it affects not only the people who are directly targeted, but the consequences are intergenerational. They live from one generation to the next. even among people who were not alive at the time of the genocide. And intergenerational trauma is defined as the shown impact of trauma experienced by one family member on another family member of a younger generation, regardless of whether the younger member was directly exposed to the traumatic event. When we talk about historical trauma, it's widespread among a specific group, perpetrated by outgroup members, and the event generates a high level of distress in victimized groups. What we know about the individual impact of trauma, there's a sense of loneliness, isolation, a mistrust due to a conspiracy of silence, and what has been called an ethical or existential loneliness, the idea that one lives in silence and no one is hearing or seeing what is happening. There's a rupture or regression, a fixity in time, assault on family structure, on cultural identity. Essentially, it is an assault and a rupture of everything that has created security and that has allowed individuals to experience life. People have difficulty remembering events. Things are not remembered in a chronological order. People may remember smells or touch, but not remember the sequence of events. There's an increased risk of depression, of suicide, of fear, hypervigilance, and their survivor syndrome. This idea, why did I, among all the people who were killed or all the people who were injured, why did I survive? In terms of how this is transmitted intergenerationally, we know that there can be projective identification, transmission to children through silence, through under-disclosure, sometimes through over-disclosure at a time when the child is not mentally or emotionally prepared to process the information. There's continuing historical trauma through acculturation stress. And then the information is acquired through biological dysregulation, at least the stresses, I should say. Intergenerational trauma represents cultural genocide, actions that are threatening to the integrity and continuing viability of peoples and social groups. For a survivor, there is an individual struggle to overcome the trauma. And for a targeted group, it becomes part of their historical record that they must deal with on a continuing basis. And everything is filtered through this experience. We know that families are the conscious and that carry conscious and unconscious values and memories. Children are witnesses to familial trauma, and the trauma becomes a core existential and relational experience for multiple generations. It is unconscious and it is passed on by those experiencing the trauma. And as I mentioned before, this shapes our internal representation of reality. There is potentially a breakdown in social values, loss of the spiritual compass, loss of language and culture. There can be assimilation by the group into a culture that destroyed their very culture. And very often there's an interplay between historical trauma and contemporary trauma. The effect on offspring, research has demonstrated that there can be earlier mortality, a heightened vulnerability to psychological stress, stress-induced neurochemical changes, high levels of perceived discrimination, preoccupation with parental trauma, so children may become parents to their parents, and there may be increased difficulties with communicating emotion and increased self-criticism. So who are witnesses? The state, the government is a witness, and we see this through international relations, both during and subsequent to the genocide, truth commissions and international tribunals following the genocide, and individual governments during the course of the genocide and after. We see a civil society of nonconformity, as it has been called, of people who see, individuals who see what is happening around them and choose to act in a way that does not conform to the prevailing opinion. And we see healthcare providers and emergency personnel, bystanders who are trying to aid the victims of the genocide. What we know on an international level is that there has been some consensus around the ethical responsibilities of nations, that each individual state has the responsibility to protect its populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. And the international community should, as appropriate, encourage and help states to exercise this responsibility and support the United Nations. There are 3 pillars to this responsibility: that each state has the responsibility to protect its populations from genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. That what is important here is that the wider international community has the responsibility to encourage and assist individual states in meeting that responsibility. And we see that happening now with the war on Ukraine. And pillar 3, if a state is manifestly failing to protect its populations, the international community must be prepared to take appropriate collective action. So when we look at individual means of resistance, there's no overriding consensus as to what individuals should or shouldn't do. We know that people act out of different motivations. Some of the most common means of resistance include sheltering, hiding people from the potential for being killed or for being harmed, rescuing them, helping them to escape. There are helpful bystanders who give warnings. They may not shelter people, they may not rescue people, but they say, you need to be aware of this oncoming force. You need to leave, and they give people warnings. And civil society of nonconformity. So for instance, we saw this during the Holocaust, where individuals did not conform to the laws that had been passed, mandating reporting of individuals, euthanizing of individuals, but instead acted contrary to those laws. Why do people do this? Some people act out of a sense of altruism, some based on their religious motivations, some simply because they have a sense that what is happening is wrong. So I thank you for this presentation, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts as to what our individual ethical and moral responsibilities are in the face of genocide. Thank you.